Imagine walking peacefully through the streets of a vibrant city. Suddenly, the ground shakes violently beneath your feet. The sky darkens as if night had fallen at noon. A column of fire and ash rises on the horizon. The air becomes unbreathable. In just 18 hours, 20,000 people would disappear forever, preserved in their positions of agony. In 79 AD, Pompeii faced the most well-documented apocalypse in ancient history. And if you had been there, your chances of survival would have been practically zero. Discover why not even our modern instincts would have saved you the day Vesuvius decided to awaken. To understand why you wouldn't survive the day of Vesuvius, you first need to understand what life was like in Pompeii. In 79 AD, this was no ordinary town. It was a luxurious metropolis that breathed prosperity. While you try to imagine the horror of that fateful day, let's go back in time and walk its polished stone streets. Pompeii was what we would now call an elite tourist destination. Roman aristocrats built their second homes there. Impressive mansions boasted interior gardens, decorative fountains, and colorful frescoes that still retain their vibrant hues. Today, the streets were perfectly planned, with raised sidewalks for pedestrians and spaced cobblestones for crossing during rainy weather without getting your feet wet. The city bustled with commercial activity. More than 600 shops and taverns dotted its streets. There were bakeries with ovens still containing charred bread, wineries that processed grapes grown on the fertile slopes of what they never imagined was a volcano, street-side eateries called Thermopylae, where workers ate quick meals at marble counters with built-in containers to keep the food warm. And then there were the city's pleasures, the public baths, veritable marble palaces with sophisticated underfloor heating systems. The amphitheater, the oldest known in the Roman world, where 20,000 people could watch gladiatorial combats, was decorated with graphic frescoes that served as both visual menu and decoration. But here lies the crucial detail that would seal this city's fate. Despite all its sophistication, the Pompeians were completely ignorant of the nature of the mountain that dominated their skyline. Vesuvius had not erupted in nearly 700 years. No one alive had any memory or record of its fury. To them, it was simply a fertile mountain where they grew some of the region's finest grapes. This is the chilling paradox of Pompeii, a society advanced enough to build complex hydraulic systems, create stunning art, and enjoy luxuries that rival our modern comforts, yet lacking the basic geological knowledge that could have saved thousands. They literally built their civilization on a trigger of mass destruction, completely oblivious to the danger. And even when nature began to send signals, they didn't know how to interpret them. Because, as you'll discover now, Vesuvius didn't erupt without warning. For years, even decades, it had been sending warnings that no one could decipher. What makes the Pompeii tragedy even more chilling is that Vesuvius didn't strike without warning. For years, the mountain had been sending clear signals that, with our modern knowledge, would have emptied the city long before that fateful August day, 17 years before the eruption, on February 5th, 62 AD. A devastating earthquake shook Pompeii, with such violence that practically not a single building remained intact. Temples collapsed, statues were decapitated, aqueducts broke. The Forum, heart of public life, was left in ruins. It was so intense that even in Naples, 30 kilometers away, buildings collapsed. We know this thanks to the CEC, the philosopher who wrote, Pompeii, the famous city of the countryside, collapsed due to an earthquake that also shook all the surrounding regions. For the Pompeians, this was not a geological warning. It was a divine omen. Perhaps the wrath of Vulcan, the god of fire, whose name we ironically lend to volcanoes. Instead of evacuating the region, they dedicated themselves to a frantic campaign of reconstruction. When Vesuvius finally erupted, many public buildings were still under construction. Archaeologists have found abandoned construction tools, buckets, of mortar, partially repaired walls, frozen evidence of a city betting on the future while it was about to be erased. But the earthquake of 62 was only the most dramatic in a series of warnings. In the months before the eruption, smaller tremors became so common that people stopped fearing them. An account discovered on a charred papyrus mentions how the earth never stopped shaking, but already we've grown accustomed to it. Wells began to mysteriously dry up. Others bubbled with hot, sulfurous water. Animals fled the slopes of Vesuvius. Reports mentioned strange behavior in birds and dogs. Today we know that animals can sense subtle changes in gases and ground vibrations, imperceptible to humans. There is evidence that in the weeks before the eruption, small fumaroles, emissions of hot gases, began to appear on the mountainside. In any modern city, geologists would have recognized these signs as the prelude to an impending disaster. There would have been mass evacuations, but in 79 AD these were merely curiosities, perhaps provocations from the gods, nothing to seriously worry about. Pliny himself, the elderly commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum and one of the most learned men of his time, observed these phenomena with scientific curiosity, not alarm. His curiosity would ultimately cost him his life when he sailed directly toward the catastrophe in the name of investigation. The most disturbing truth is this. Until tomorrow, August 24th, Pompeii functioned normally. Bakers prepared fresh bread. Merchants opened their shops. Children played in the streets. Routine continued unchanged. In one bakery, archaeologists found 81 perfectly preserved loaves of bread still in the ovens, never delivered. And then around noon, the centuries-long silence was shattered by a deafening roar that would forever change the meaning of the word catastrophe. Vesuvius finally awoke. That deafening roar at 1 p.m. on August 24th, 79, Bent de Christ, marked the end of ignorance. Vesuvius was not just a mountain, it was a sleeping killer that had just awakened. We have a precise chronology of that day thanks to Pliny, the young nephew of Pliny the Elder, who observed the eruption from a safe distance and later documented the events in detailed letters to the historian Tacitus. His descriptions are so accurate that modern volcanologists have dubbed explosive eruptions as eruptions, Plinian monuments in his honor. A cloud arose, he wrote, from a mountain that most experienced observers believed to be Vesuvius. The cloud resembled a Mediterranean pine, rising as an extremely tall trunk and then opening into numerous branches. What Plinius described, with incredible accuracy, was the eruption column that rose more than 30 kilometers high, 3 times the cruising altitude of modern aircraft. Geologists estimate that the initial explosion released energy equivalent to 100,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The cap of rock that had sealed the volcano for centuries was pulverized, spewing about 4 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and toxic gases into the atmosphere in a matter of minutes. For the Pompeians, the first sign of danger was not visual, but auditory. Witnesses described a rumble like 1,000 thunderclaps. The ground vibrated so violently that many could not stand. In seconds, day turned to night. As the gigantic ash cloud blotted out the sun, an unearthly darkness enveloped the city, interrupted only by volcanic lightning tearing through the black cloud. But the most terrifying thing for those in the city wasn't what they could see. It was what they couldn't understand. There was no context for what was happening. There were no National Geographic documentaries. There were no geological reports. There was no knowledge of tectonics, plates, or volcanology. Imagine the terror of Julia Felix, a wealthy merchant whose name we know from the inscriptions in her villa. At the time of the eruption, she was likely supervising her slaves in the atrium of her house. When the roar began, her first reaction was likely religious, offering sacrifices to the gods. When the walls began to shake, she may have thought it was just another earthquake, like the many she had experienced. When darkness fell, there was no precedent for understanding what was happening. Archaeological discoveries reveal the chaos of those first moments. In one house, they found a table with an untouched meal. In another, jewelry, scattered across the ground, knocked over during the hasty escape. A toolbox abandoned by a carpenter in the middle of a job. Frozen evidence of the exact moment normalcy gave way to panic. The city quickly split into 2 groups, those who fled immediately and those who hesitated. And this hesitation, this crucial delay in recognizing the gravity of the situation, doomed thousands. Entire families remained in their homes, believing that the storm, for that was what many thought it, would soon pass. Others fled to temples and public buildings, seeking divine protection rather than physical escape. There was one family, the Veti, whose bodies were found huddled together in their triclinium, the dining room. They apparently decided to wait out the danger, perhaps trusting in the thick walls of their luxurious villa. It was a fatal decision. The walls that protected them from the elements became their prison when the true horror was just beginning. Because what no one in Pompeii knew is that erupting column, that deadly pine of ash and rock, was only the prelude. The worst was yet to come, in the form of something no human had ever documented or survived to describe. The pyroclastic flows, the deadly plume of ash and smoke rising above Vesuvius, were only the beginning of the nightmare. The eruption would unfold in distinct phases, each more deadly than the last, like a methodical killer executing its plan with terrifying precision. The first phase lasted approximately 6 hours. A steady rain of pumice, light porous fragments of cooled magma, began to fall on Pompeii. These were no ordinary hailstones. They were volcanic projectiles the size of golf balls, some weighing over 2 pounds, falling at speeds of up to 60 mph. Imagine being hit by a baseball thrown by a professional pitcher, but coming from the sky non-stop for hours. Rooftops, even the sturdiest, began to sag under the accumulated weight. Excavations reveal layers of pumice up to 10 feet thick, covering the city. Think about it. The second floors of many buildings were completely buried in this initial phase. Some desperate Pompeians tried to protect themselves using cushions, pillows or mattresses tied to their heads. Archaeologists have found bodies with these makeshift helmets still in place. One man was discovered lying face down with a large piece of marble on his head. A desperate attempt at protection that was not enough. As the pumice accumulated, the air became increasingly unbreathable. Fine ash mixed with toxic gases, sulfur dioxide, hydrochloric acid, and carbon monoxide created a lethal cocktail. Many who survived the impact succumbed to asphyxiation, their lungs collapsing under the strain of filtering the poisoned air. But then, around 7 a.m. the next day, after 18 hours of continuous eruption, something terrible happened. The eruptive column, which had remained stable for hours, began to collapse. What followed is unparalleled in any modern natural disaster we can easily comprehend. The flow's pyroclastic surges, or surges, as volcanologists call them, are a volcano's most lethal weapons. Imagine avalanches of superheated gases, ash and rock fragments rushing down the mountain at speeds of up to 7,600 km/h, faster than a commercial airliner, with internal temperatures between 400 and 700 degrees Celsius. These fiery clouds don't descend along the terrain like lava. They move like a horizontal storm, devastating everything in their path. Trees, buildings, people, nothing remains standing. The first flow hit Herculaneum, a town neighboring Pompeii, instantly killing everyone still there. It wasn't until the sixth pyroclastic surge around 7:30 a.m. that Pompeii was finally hit. Archaeologists found clear evidence of this moment on the bodies: pugilistic defense postures, contracted arms and legs, clawed hands caused by the extreme heat that instantly contracted muscles and tendons. A Roman guard whose body was found still in his position on the city gate, he literally died on duty. His skeleton, still wearing remnants of armor, was perfectly preserved in an upright position. He did not abandon his post, perhaps believing until the last moment that his military discipline would save him, a poignant example of duty and also of futility in the face of the forces of nature. An entire family, a father, mother, and 2 young children, was found embraced in their room, the parents covering the children with their own bodies in a final attempt at protection. The heat was so intense that their bodies were instantly dehydrated and sealed in the ash, creating the famous casts we see today in the Pompeii Museum. What makes these deaths particularly horrific is their speed. Recent studies show that death was practically instantaneous. The heat of the pyroclastic flow was so extreme that it vaporized bodily fluids and caused thermal fractures in the skulls. The victims didn't even have time to register the pain. In a matter of seconds, their bodies went from alive to charred. And for those who wonder if modern technology would save us from a similar fate, the answer is disturbing. Even our best air raid shelters, reinforced concrete bankers, would not withstand the combination of extreme heat, speed, and pressure of a pyroclastic flow. The only salvation was early evacuation, something many Pompeians attempted, but as you will now discover, even escape proved tragic for most. While some remained in Pompeii, facing certain death, thousands of others made the seemingly obvious decision: flee as quickly as possible. But what should have been their salvation turned into a new nightmare. Their escape attempts revealed a cruel truth. Sometimes, running is not enough. The true horror of the Vesuvius eruption is that it eliminated survival options one by one, like a predator methodically cornering its prey. For the Pompeians, there were only 3 escape routes: by land along the Roman roads, by sea through the harbor, or seeking shelter in structures that seemed sturdy. All of these options proved fatal for most. The roads leading out of Pompeii, masterpieces of Roman engineering with their perfectly laid stone pavements, quickly turned into death traps. Think of the worst traffic jams you've ever seen and multiply it by 10. Thousands tried to leave simultaneously. Carts loaded with belongings blocked the way. Panicked animals refused to advance. The constant rain of volcanic rocks made the crossing even more dangerous. In 2018, archaeologists discovered the body of a man who had managed to escape the city, only to be crushed by a huge block of volcanic rock as he walked. His skeleton was found with his skull severed from his body, his head completely destroyed by the impact. A death as sudden as it was violent, just meters from possible freedom. On the Paranapolis Road, one of the main escape routes, excavations revealed more than 300 bodies huddled in small shelters along the way. These temporary refugees believed they could wait out the worst of the eruption before continuing their journey. They didn't know that the worst was yet to come, with the pyroclastic flows that swept through the entire region. Escape by sea seemed the most promising. After all, the danger came from the mountains, not the ocean. Pliny, the elderly commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, ordered warships to the coast to rescue refugees. It was a heroic rescue mission, the first documented in history that would cost him his own life. The beaches quickly became overrun with desperate people. Archaeological evidence is chilling. Footprints in the volcanic sand show entire families running toward the sea. Along with these footprints, small valuables, coins, jewelry, and amulets were left behind as they ran. But the sea, which was supposed to be salvation, became another trap. Witnesses report that the waters suddenly receded before returning in violent waves, likely a small tsunami caused by tremors or the impact of volcanic material in the sea. Already overcrowded boats capsized. Others were unable to even leave the coast due to the chaotic conditions. At Herculaneum, a particularly poignant discovery was made in the 1980s, more than 300 skeletons in the ancient storage chambers of the port. These people had reached the sea but were trapped waiting for boats that either never arrived or were unable to board. When the first pyroclastic flow struck Herculaneum, they all died instantly, their bodies preserved in the exact position they were in when the extreme heat reached them. A Roman soldier was found still clutching his sword, a young woman with a baby in her arms, a man clutching a small bag of coins, his life savings he hoped to use to start over elsewhere. Intimate details of lives cut short at the moment of desperate hope. Even Pliny the Elder, one of the most powerful men in the region, was unable to escape. When his ship finally reached the coast near Setbia, he disembarked, likely to help friends or investigate the phenomenon as the natural scientist he was. His body was found 3 days later, with no visible injuries, likely a victim of the toxic gases. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these escape attempts is that many nearly succeeded. Archaeologists found bodies just a few hundred meters beyond the immediate danger zone. People who, had they left a few hours earlier, would have survived. Families who hesitated to gather belongings or wait for straggling relatives. Understandable, deeply human choices that proved fatal. And herein lies the darkest lesson for us moderns. Even with our technology, our early warning systems, and our evacuation plans, we would face similar challenges. The roads around Naples today, a metropolis of 3 million people living in the shadow of the same volcano, would be completely paralyzed. Our modern vehicles, our helicopters and boats could rescue some, but not millions. And time, the most precious resource in any disaster, would be as scarce today as it was 2,000 years ago. As survivors ran for their lives, the city they abandoned was being buried alive, preserved for eternity in a coffin of volcanic ash. As the few survivors walked away, looking back only to see a column of smoke where a thriving city once stood, Pompeii was being sealed in a time capsule. The process of burying the city was as meticulous as it was accidental, creating what would become the greatest archaeological treasure ever discovered. The city wasn't simply covered, it was preserved in distinct layers, each telling part of its final story. First came the pumice rain, about 3 meters of light, porous fragments that buried the first floors of buildings. Then finer ash filled every empty space, every crevice, every room. Finally, pyroclastic flows covered everything with a dense, compact mass that hardened like natural cement. This sequence created something extraordinary as wood, fabrics, and other organic materials slowly decomposed. They left perfect voids within the compacted ash, negative casts of their original form. Human bodies underwent the same process. The flesh decomposed, but the outer shell of hardened ash retained the exact shape of the person in their final moments. In 1863, archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli made a revolutionary discovery. Upon finding one of these voids, he had the idea of injecting plaster into it, creating what we now know as the Pompeii casts, perfect replicas of people, frozen in time. A dog writhing on its leash, a pregnant woman protecting her belly, a man covering his face trying to filter the toxic air. Snapshots of terror perfectly preserved for nearly 2 millennia. But the most astonishing thing is not just the preservation of the bodies, but the preservation of everyday life, in all its mundane details. Bread still in the ovens, eggs intact on trays, game pieces arranged mid-game, erotic paintings on the brothel walls, as vivid as if they had been painted yesterday. Political graffiti on the walls, vote for Lucius for a dial. He provides good bread, the last moment of an entire civilization, preserved like a fly in amber. And then, the most incredible thing happened. The world forgot Pompeii completely. The Ritu city disappeared not only physically, but from collective memory. In the centuries that followed, some literary references vaguely mentioned a destroyed city, but its exact location was lost. Vesuvius, unaware of the trauma it had caused, fell asleep again. Vines were replanted on its slopes. New cities sprang up nearby. Life continued literally above the dead. It was only in 1748, more than 16 years later, that a farmer, digging a well accidentally punctured the roof of the Pompeii amphitheater. What followed was one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history, an entire Roman city preserved at the precise moment of its destruction. Not time-worn ruins, not building foundations, but a complete city, with its streets, shops, houses, and temples. The impact of this discovery on 17th century Europe was seismic. It was as if they had found a time machine. Suddenly, the ancient world was no longer an abstraction in classical texts. It was something they could see, touch, walk its streets. The discovery of Pompeii fundamentally altered our understanding of the Roman world. What makes Pompeii unique among all the catastrophes in history is precisely this preservation. Other cities were destroyed. Carthage was razed by the Romans, Baghdad devastated by the Mongols, London burned in its Great Fire, but none were preserved at the exact moment of their destruction. Imagine if we could walk the streets of Hiroshima in the instant after the atomic bomb, or New Orleans the day after catastrophe. It is this frozen window in time that Pompeii offers us. The buried city revealed surprising details about Roman life that no text could tell. We discovered that the Romans ate fast food, loved gambling, scrawled obscene graffiti, used sophisticated beauty creams, and propagated political propaganda on every available surface. We discovered that their architecture was colorful and vibrant, not white and austere as we imagined. We discovered that their homes had impressive plumbing systems and that they cultivated medicinal herbs in their gardens. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect is what this preservation reveals to us about humanity in the face of disaster. In their final moments, some people clutched gold and jewelry, a reflection of valuing material possessions, even in the face of death. Others were found embracing, choosing to comfort loved ones in their final moments. One soldier remained at his post, a baker died alongside his bread. Each body tells not only a story of death, but a story of how they chose to face death. And today, more than 2,000 years later, Vesuvius still stands there, silently watching, no longer forgotten or ignored, but monitored by a network of more than 18 seismic stations, analyzed by satellites constantly studied. Naples and dozens of smaller cities have grown around it, with more than 3 million people living in the danger zone, the most densely populated volcanic area on the planet. Volcanologists don't ask whether Vesuvius will erupt again, but when and where will it happen? Will our modern technology be enough? Or will future generations find our cars, our smartphones, and our bodies preserved in ash just as we found the Pompeians? The most disturbing irony about Pompeii is that as we excavate and study its remains, we are repeating the exact same mistake its inhabitants made 2 millennia ago. Vesuvius isn't dead, it's just sleeping. Today, more than 3 million people live in the so-called red zone surrounding the volcano, the area that would be directly affected by an eruption. Naples, a vibrant metropolis of nearly 1 million inhabitants, is just 12 kilometers from the crater. Dozens of smaller cities cluster even closer, some literally on the volcano's slopes. It's the most densely populated volcanic area in the world. And it's not just Vesuvius. Cities around the planet repeat the same pattern. Seattle and Tacoma grow in the shadow of Mount Rainier, a volcano that geologically is almost Vesuvius's twin. Mexico City, with its 21 million inhabitants, is surrounded by active volcanoes. Tokyo lives under the constant threat of Mount Fuji. Catania, Sicily, exists on the slopes of the Ina. It's as if humanity suffers from collective amnesia about volcanic risks. The difference, of course, is that today we have science. Vesuvius is the most closely monitored volcano on the planet. A network of 18 seismic stations records every tiny tremor. Gas sensors detect changes in the chemical composition of fumaroles. Radar interferometers measure ground deformations with millimeter precision. Satellites observe thermal changes in the crater. If Vesuvius even breathes more deeply, scientists will know instantly. But here's the crucial question: would that be enough? Experts estimate that in the most optimistic scenario, we would have about 2 weeks warning before a major eruption. 2 weeks to evacuate 3 million people along winding roads dating back to Roman times, many of them passing through areas that would be the first to be hit. The Italian government's current emergency plan calls for evacuating the red zone within 72 hours, 3 days to empty an area the size of a small nation. When this plan was tested in computer simulations, the results were grim. Massive traffic, jams, blocked roads, and widespread panic. Forecasts indicate that hundreds of thousands would not be able to evacuate in time, and this assumes a perfect scenario where everyone follows evacuation orders immediately. But experience with other disasters, hurricanes, tsunamis, fires, shows that many refuse to leave, distrusting authorities or fearing abandoning their homes and possessions. In 2022, a survey revealed that 22% of red zone residents said they would think twice before evacuating, even with an official warning. Our technology has advanced, but human psychology remains surprisingly constant. Like the Pompeians who fatally hesitated, many of us still underestimate natural risks, especially those that occur rarely. This is what psychologists call the normalization of risk, our tendency to consider the familiar safe, even when all the evidence points to the contrary. And there is another unsettling parallel between us and the ancient Romans. Like them, we have overconfidence in our buildings. The Pompeians sought refuge in solid buildings, believing their sturdy walls would protect them. Today, we have skyscrapers, designed to withstand earthquakes, but no human structure, absolutely none, can withstand the direct impact of a pyroclastic flow. New research on Vesuvius is even more disturbing. Recent geological analyses suggest that the volcano is in a cycle of activity that typically culminates in explosive eruptions every 2 years. 0 years. On average, the last major eruption was at 79 Christ Point. Doing the math, we are technically behind. Magma is slowly accumulating in deep chambers, building pressure that will eventually need to be released. In 2019, an international team of scientists detected a massive magmatic reservoir 8 kilometers beneath Vesuvius, much larger than previously believed. This reservoir contains enough material to fuel an eruption several times more powerful than the one in 79 AD. And so we arrive at the most disturbing paradox. Our own technology, which gives us a false sense of security, can make us more vulnerable than the ancient Romans. We are more dependent on infrastructure that can fail. Our cities are denser. Our ability to survive without modern food, electricity, and water distribution systems is practically nil. The average Pompeii resident knew how to grow food, get water from wells, navigate without GPS, communicate without phones. The average Napolis resident today would be completely disoriented without these technologies. Our specialization has made us exceptionally efficient, but also exceptionally fragile. In 1944, during World War II, Vesuvius erupted on a relatively small scale. Even so, it destroyed several villages and a fleet of American bombers stationed in the region. It was a reminder. The volcano doesn't care about our wars, our politics, our technology. It operates on a geological timescale where 2,000 years, there's just the blink of an eye. And while we await the giant's inevitable awakening, we continue to live, build, and plan in his shadow, just as the citizens of Pompeii did 2 millennia ago. Perhaps the greatest lesson from that ancient tragedy is not about volcanoes or evacuations, but about human nature and our surprising ability to normalize even the most catastrophic threats. When we look at Pompeii, we are not just looking at the past. We are potentially looking into our own future. As Vesuvius continues its silent geological clock, I wonder what future archaeologists would find if our cities were preserved like Pompeii. Our smartphones, our clothes, our habits. What story would they tell about who we were? The truth is that Pompeii offers us more than a lesson about volcanoes. It shows us a mirror of our own fragility and, at the same time, our incredible capacity for resistance. Even in the face of the apocalypse, we continue to build, create, live, because that is what we do as a species. If this video has piqued your curiosity about how civilizations face catastrophes, you will be fascinated by the story I'm telling in the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It's an even deeper exploration of how ancient societies dealt with disasters that completely transformed the world they knew. Oh, and if you like this trip back in time to the fateful day of Pompeii, that thumbs up makes all the difference. The algorithm loves it as much as the Romans loved their public baths. Subscribe to the channel for more historical trips like this. Share with friends who love mysteries of the past, and tell me in the comments. If you were in Pompeii, what decision would you have made when he saw that first column of smoke on the horizon? The story continues only for those who stay. And speaking of continuing stories, that video is waiting for you. Believe me, it's a journey as fascinating as the one we just took. Until the next dive into history,